Montana Territory, 1881. The sky stretched endless and cold above the rolling hills of Paradise Valley, where winter snow blanketed the earth in silent isolation. Here, at the edge of civilization, most folks believed in two certainties: the brutal indifference of nature and the fleeting warmth of human connection. Nathan Reed believed this more than most as he rode through knee-deep snow toward the Emerson homestead, his breath clouding before him like the ghosts of broken promises. At 25, Nathan had learned the frontier's harshest lesson: attachment was the surest path to devastation. He'd buried his parents, lost his brother to a Sioux raid, and watched good men die from accidents, illness, and the casual violence that defined the territory. The only sensible approach to the West was solitude, the only reliable companion a good horse and a loaded Colt. No sense in putting down roots where the ground's liable to crack open and swallow you whole, he told his ranch hands just yesterday. Nathan had built the Broken Arrow into a modest success through discipline and detachment, hiring help but keeping his distance, working himself to exhaustion to avoid dwelling on the emptiness of his cabin at night. Through the swirling snow, the Emerson place emerged, a sturdy log home with smoke rising from the chimney, a barn in need of repair, and cattle huddled in the corral. 6 months ago, the old widow Emerson had passed, leaving the homestead to her granddaughter from back east. Nathan had promised the neighboring ranchers he'd check on the newcomer as winter descended, a courtesy and nothing more. The territory had a way of driving out those who didn't belong, and city folks rarely lasted a season. Nathan dismounted at the hitching post, stamping his boots to restore circulation. His plan was simple: ensure the woman had enough supplies to survive, offer pragmatic advice, then return to his own land before any misplaced sense of obligation could take root. Sentiment was as dangerous as a prairie blizzard and twice as disorienting. The cabin door swung open before he could knock. Framed in golden lamplight stood Zoe Emerson, 22 years old, and utterly unprepared for Montana winters in her eastern dress, though she'd sensibly wrapped a heavy woolen shawl around her shoulders. Her honey-blonde hair was gathered in a practical braid, but wisps had escaped to frame a face too delicate for frontier hardship. Her eyes, clear blue as summer skies, regarded him with cautious curiosity. "Mr. Reed, I presume?" Her voice carried the refined cadence of Boston finishing schools. "The Hendersons said you might check in. Please, come in before you freeze solid." "Just making sure you're supplied for winter, Miss Emerson." Nathan removed his hat, but remained firmly on the threshold. "First Montana winter can catch folks unprepared." She smiled, and something in Nathan's chest tightened uncomfortably. "Then you'd better come assess my preparedness, sir. I've coffee brewing." The interior of the cabin was unexpectedly orderly. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling beams, preserves lined neatly labeled shelves, and a small desk near the window held accounting ledgers. Not the chaos he'd anticipated from an Eastern transplant. "My grandmother's letters were quite specific about winter necessities," Zoe explained, pouring coffee into a tin cup. "I arrived in August to learn what I could before the snow." "Planning to sell come spring?" Nathan accepted the coffee, careful not to let their fingers touch. Her gaze met his directly. "This is my home now, Mr. Reed. My father's banking business left me comfortable but smothered. Grandmother's letters painted a life of substance here. I intend to honor her by making this ranch thrive." Nathan nearly choked on his coffee. "Miss Emerson, ranching isn't like tending a garden. It's backbreaking work, constant danger, and crushing disappointment. Like life anywhere, I imagine," she replied with unexpected sharpness. "Only here, the dangers are honest ones." Before Nathan could respond, a crash from the barn sent him instinctively reaching for his revolver. Zoe was already pulling on her coat. "The roof's been weakening," she explained, heading for the door. The weight of the snow. They rushed to the barn together, where a portion of the roof had indeed collapsed, frightening the horses and trapping 2 milk cows beneath debris. Without discussion, they fell into coordinated effort, Nathan lifting heavy beams while Zoe calmed and freed the animals. Working together, they managed to shore up the remaining structure temporarily. "You handled that well," Nathan admitted grudgingly, watching her check a cow for injuries with knowledgeable hands. Grandmother sent detailed instructions about livestock care. Snow dusted Zoe's eyelashes as she straightened. "But I can't repair this roof alone." Against his better judgment, Nathan heard himself say, "I'll bring men tomorrow. We'll fix it properly. I can pay. Neighbors help neighbors out here," he interrupted. "It's how the territory works." Something shifted in her expression. "Then I'm fortunate to have a neighbor like you, Mr. Reed." That night, riding home through deepening snow, Nathan fought against the memory of her smile and the inexplicable pull to turn his horse around. Attachment in the West wasn't just foolish, it was fatal. People died, left, or broke under the relentless pressure of frontier life. He'd return with his men, fix her roof, and maintain a proper distance. But the territorial winter had other plans. 3 days later, a blizzard trapped Nathan and 2 ranch hands at the Emerson homestead after completing repairs. As howling winds erased the world outside, Nathan found himself seated at Zoe's table, sharing a hearty stew and conversation that stretched late into the evening. His hands betrayed him by noticing her graceful movements, his eyes by following her across the room, his ears by catching the musical quality of her laugh. "Why did you stay?" she asked him as the ranch hands dozed by the fire. "In Montana, I mean. You don't speak of it as fondly as most." Nathan studied his coffee, uncomfortable with her perception. "Nowhere else to go. My father brought us when I was 12. By 16, I was burying him and my mother, taking over what little they'd built." "I'm sorry," she said simply. "It's the frontier," he replied with practiced detachment. "It takes more than it gives. Yet you've built something substantial. The Hendersons speak highly of your ranch. Built it to survive, nothing more." He set down his cup. "That's all anyone can hope for out here." "Is it?" Zoe challenged gently. "My grandmother's letters spoke of community, of barn raisings and harvest dances, of neighbors bringing food when children were born. She wrote of hardship, yes, but also of joy." Nathan frowned. "Your grandmother was fortunate, then. Most find loneliness and loss." "Perhaps people find what they're looking for," Zoe suggested, her eyes meeting his with unsettling directness. "Or what they believe they deserve." The blizzard passed, but something had taken root in Nathan despite his resistance. Over the following weeks, he found reasons to ride to the Emerson homestead, bringing supplies, checking fences, offering advice on cattle management. Each visit deepened his awareness of Zoe's determination and unexpected competence. She learned quickly, asked intelligent questions, and faced setbacks with resilience that earned his reluctant admiration. February brought a welcome thaw, and the county's winter social, held in the Masons' barn near the growing settlement of Livingston. Nathan had avoided these gatherings for years, but found himself cleaning his best shirt and trimming his stubble before riding to the Emerson place. "You needn't escort me," Zoe protested when he arrived, though her eyes brightened at his appearance. She wore a dress of deep blue wool that emphasized her slender waist and brought out the color of her eyes. Her honey blonde hair was arranged in an elegant knot, making her look both sophisticated and achingly young. "Roads are still treacherous," he explained, not meeting her gaze. "Neighborly precaution." The barn was transformed with lanterns and evergreen boughs, filled with the territory's scattered inhabitants hungry for human connection after months of isolation. Nathan watched Zoe charm the community, from weathered ranchers to shopkeepers' wives, her natural grace drawing people to her like moths to flame. "Your Eastern ladies settling in well," observed Joseph Henderson, nodding toward Zoe as she laughed with the blacksmith's daughter. "Thought for sure she'd run back east first snowfall." "She's not my lady," Nathan corrected sharply. "Just being neighborly." Henderson raised an eyebrow. "That why you've been riding to her place 3 times a week? Mighty specific neighborhood you're defining." Before Nathan could retort, the fiddlers struck up a lively reel. Couples formed sets for dancing, and to his surprise, Zoe appeared before him. "I believe neighbors should dance together, Mr. Reed," she said with a challenging smile. Unless Montana customs differ drastically from Boston's. Dancing with Zoe felt dangerously like freedom. Her hand in his, her laughter rising above the music, the warmth of her body as the dance brought them together. Each sensation chipped away at the walls he'd built. When the music slowed to a waltz, Nathan knew he should step away, but his arms seemed to have developed a will of their own. "You're quite good at this for a man who claims to avoid gatherings," she murmured as they moved across the floor. "My mother taught me," he admitted. "Before we came west. She said civilized men should know how to dance." "And are you civilized, Nathan Reed?" Her use of his first name sent an unexpected current through him. Less each year, I suspect. Her eyes held his. I see evidence to the contrary. Later, beneath a sky brilliant with stars, they rode home in a silence charged with unspoken possibilities. At her cabin, Nathan helped her down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment too long. "Thank you for the escort," she said softly. "And the dances." "Zoe," he began, then faltered, unaccustomed to the vulnerability welling in his chest. "The thaw's coming. You should know that spring brings its own challenges, flooding, predators after new calves. I could, that is, if you needed, I would welcome your guidance," she said, saving him from his awkward offer. "Perhaps you could come for dinner tomorrow, to discuss spring preparations." That dinner became the first of many. Through March's unpredictable weather, Nathan found himself drawn to the Emerson homestead with increasing frequency. They worked side by side, mending fences damaged by winter, assessing cattle, and planning spring breeding. In the evenings, they shared meals and conversation that ranged from practical ranching concerns to books they'd read, childhood memories, and dreams neither had voiced aloud before. "You've changed since winter began," his foreman, Thomas, remarked one morning as Nathan prepared to ride out. "Got a look about you I ain't seen before." Nathan frowned. "Just helping a neighbor get established. Makes sense for the valley to have successful operations." Thomas nodded sagely. "Sure, boss. That's why you're whistling while you saddle up. Agricultural prosperity." By April, when the first wildflowers appeared in sheltered valleys, Nathan could no longer deny the transformation taking place within him. Zoe had become essential. Her perspective, her laughter, her courage in facing frontier challenges. He found himself planning improvements to his own cabin, considering how a woman might view the sparse furnishings, wondering if the second bedroom might someday hold a child's bed. These thoughts terrified him. The Montana Territory took what you loved. That was its nature. Every time he allowed himself to imagine a future with Zoe, memories of freshly dug graves and abandoned homesteads rose to haunt him. One evening, as they walked the property line checking for damaged fencing, Zoe stopped abruptly. "Nathan, there's something I need to understand." The seriousness in her tone alarmed him. "What is it?" "We've spent nearly every day together these past months. You ride miles in all weather to help with my ranch. We talk late into the night. Yet sometimes, I see you pull away as if burned when our hands touch accidentally." Her cheeks flushed, but she continued bravely. "In Boston, such attention would signify intention. But here, I find myself uncertain." Nathan stared at the distant mountains, heart hammering. "The territory isn't kind to those who form attachments," he finally said. "I've watched good people broken by loss out here. And so you've decided not to risk it?" Her voice was gentle but persistent. "To move through life touching nothing and no one. It's survival," he insisted. "It sounds more like slow death to me." Zoe stepped closer. "Nathan, I came west seeking honest challenges, not safety. If I wanted safety, I'd have married the banker's son my father selected and lived a comfortable, stifled life." "This isn't about comfort," Nathan protested. "People die here, Zoe. They sicken, are injured, or simply give up against the endless struggle. Loving someone means watching them suffer or leave. Or it means facing those struggles together," she countered, her blue eyes holding his. "Finding strength in partnership that no individual could maintain alone." When he didn't respond, she sighed. "Spring is nearly here. Perhaps when winter ends, so too should whatever this has been between us." Her words struck him like a physical blow. "Zoe, it's all right, Nathan." She gave him a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I knew when I came west that the beautiful things here are often fleeting. Wildflowers that bloom briefly after snow, rainbows after violent storms. Perhaps you and I were just another beautiful, temporary thing." That night, alone in his cabin, Nathan confronted the truth he'd been avoiding. The thought of Zoe leaving or turning to someone else created a pain far worse than his calculated detachment had prevented. His careful strategy for surviving the frontier had become a prison. The next morning, Nathan rode to Livingston with a purpose that surprised the shopkeepers. He returned to his ranch with purchases carefully wrapped in brown paper and a resolution that both terrified and exhilarated him. But the Montana Territory had one more lesson to teach. 3 days passed before he could ride to Zoe's homestead. A spring deluge had swollen streams, and made trails treacherous. When he finally approached her property, black smoke rising above the trees sent him spurring his horse forward in alarm. The scene that greeted him was chaos. A lightning strike had ignited dry grass near the barn, and the fire had spread quickly. Zoe and her hired hand were frantically working to control the blaze and save frightened livestock. Nathan threw himself into the fight without hesitation, organizing a bucket line from the well and helping evacuate cattle from the threatened barn. For hours, they fought the fire together, faces blackened with soot, clothes soaked and smoldering in places. When the last embers were finally extinguished, the barn stood damaged but salvageable, and no animals had been lost. Zoe collapsed on an overturned bucket, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. "Another frontier welcome," she said with grim humor, wiping soot from her forehead. Nathan knelt before her, suddenly unable to maintain distance. "Are you injured?" "Just some burns on my hands." She showed him reddened palms. "Nothing serious." He took her hands gently in his, turning them to assess the damage. "You should have these treated." "I will," she assured him, then looked up to study his face. "You came at exactly the right moment." "Again, I was coming anyway," he admitted. "I had something to say to you. Something important." A wall of the barn creaked ominously, interrupting whatever confession he'd been about to make. Together, they spent the remainder of the day salvaging what they could and stabilizing the structure. By nightfall, they were both too exhausted for serious conversation. "I'll return tomorrow with men to rebuild," Nathan promised as he prepared to leave. Zoe nodded wearily. "Thank you, Nathan, for everything today." He hesitated, then reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper. "This is what I came to give you. Before the fire." Curious, Zoe unwrapped it to reveal a leather-bound journal with her initials embossed on the cover. "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched. "Open it," he urged quietly. Inside, the first page held a single line in Nathan's careful handwriting. "For recording the permanent, not the fleeting." Zoe looked up at him, confusion evident in her tired eyes. "You said our time together might be just another beautiful, temporary thing," Nathan explained, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. "I've been thinking about that, about all the reasons I've kept people at a distance." "Nathan, please, let me finish while I have the courage." He took a deep breath. "I told myself I was being realistic about the territory, but the truth is, I've been a coward. Losing my family broke something in me, and I convinced myself that isolation was wisdom rather than fear." He gestured toward the damaged barn and the homestead beyond. "Today reminded me that disaster strikes whether we love or not. The difference is in how we face it." His eyes met hers directly. "Fighting that fire alone, you might have lost everything. Together, we saved what matters." "What are you saying?" Zoe asked softly. "I'm saying that when you suggested our connection would only last the winter, I wanted to tell you that couldn't be true. Because what I feel for you isn't seasonal, Zoe. It's as permanent as these mountains." The word forever escaped his lips as a whisper, almost a prayer, as he reached for her hand. Zoe's eyes filled with tears. "I need to know you mean that, Nathan. That tomorrow you won't retreat behind your walls again." "I can't promise the territory won't bring more hardship," he said honestly. "But I can promise you won't face it alone. If you'll have me, I want to build something lasting with you, Zoe Emerson. Something that survives winter, fire, and whatever else Montana throws at us." In answer, she stepped forward into his embrace, her actions more eloquent than words. The rebuilding of Zoe's barn became a community effort. Neighbors from across the valley arrived with lumber, tools, and willing hands, the very community connection Nathan had denied existed. As they worked, he observed how naturally Zoe conversed with everyone, how she remembered details about their families, how she had woven herself into the fabric of frontier life in ways he had avoided for years. "You were right," he admitted one evening as they sat on her porch, watching the sunset paint the rebuilt barn in golden light. "About community, about connection. I was so focused on what the territory takes that I couldn't see what it offers." Zoe leaned her head against his shoulder. "We're stronger together. That's the real frontier lesson." By June, wildflowers carpeted the valley, and Nathan Reed did something many had thought impossible. He hosted a gathering at his ranch. Under an arbor built by his own hands, with neighbors from miles around in attendance, He and Zoe exchanged vows that acknowledged the reality of frontier hardship while defiantly promising a love to weather it. I take you not despite the uncertainty of this life, but because of it, Nathan vowed, his voice carrying across the gathered community. Because every day faced together has more meaning than a lifetime of solitary safety. Zoe, radiant in a dress of ivory silk with wildflowers in her honey-blonde hair, responded with equal conviction. I choose this life and this love with open eyes. Whatever comes, drought or plenty, peace or danger, we face it as one. That evening, as the celebration continued around them, Nathan led his bride to the ridge overlooking their combined properties, the Broken Arrow and the Emerson homestead, now to be joined as one ranch. I have something to show you, he said, pointing to the cabin that had once represented his isolation. Substantial additions had been built during the spring, a larger kitchen, a covered porch, and a small room with eastern-facing windows. A nursery, Zoe realized, her eyes widening as she recognized the purpose of the new room. Nathan nodded, a mixture of hope and vulnerability in his expression. I thought perhaps, someday. Zoe's smile was radiant as she took his hand and placed it gently over her abdomen. Sooner than you might think, Mr. Reed. For a moment, Nathan's old fears surfaced. The dangerous frontier, the risks of childbirth, all the uncertainties of bringing new life into such a demanding world. But looking into Zoe's eyes, he found not blind optimism, but clear-eyed courage. The same courage that had brought her west, that had helped her face fire and blizzard, that now shone as she prepared to build a family in this challenging place. Are you afraid? She asked, reading his expression with the insight that had first drawn him to her. Yes, he admitted honestly, but not enough to retreat from joy. As the summer sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley they now shared, Nathan Reed embraced the future he had once thought impossible. The Montana Territory would always demand respect, would always present challenges that tested human endurance. But he had learned its deepest lesson, that true survival wasn't found in isolation but in connection, in building something that could withstand winter's fury and emerge stronger in spring. By the time autumn painted the cottonwoods gold along the creek beds, Nathan and Zoe Reed had established a home that combined the best of their separate strengths. Their expanded ranch flourished under their complementary skills, his practical knowledge of cattle and horses, her meticulous record-keeping and innovation. The cabin that had once stood as a monument to solitary endurance now rang with conversation and laughter. When winter returned to Paradise Valley, bringing snow that blanketed the land in pristine white, Nathan stood at the window, watching Zoe in the yard. Her pregnant form wrapped warmly against the cold. She scattered feed for chickens that strutted indignantly through the snow. The scene struck him with its ordinary perfection. This life they'd built together, this love that had transformed his understanding of survival. Later that evening, as they sat before the fire, Zoe's head resting in his lap, while he read aloud from a novel she'd ordered from back east, Nathan reflected on the journey of the past year. What are you thinking? Zoe asked, noticing his distraction. You stopped reading 3 pages ago. Nathan smiled, running his fingers through her honey-blonde hair that spilled across his lap. I was thinking about last winter, when you said what was between us might only last until spring. And you whispered forever. She remembered, her hand finding his. I wasn't sure I'd heard you correctly. I wasn't sure I had the right to say it, he admitted. But I knew even then that what I felt couldn't be temporary. Outside, the Montana winter wrapped their home in its familiar embrace of snow and silence. But inside, the warmth they'd created together defied the season's isolation. Nathan Reed, who had once believed the frontier allowed no place for lasting connection, now understood the territory's most essential truth, that love, like the land itself, demanded everything but returned abundance to those brave enough to commit fully to its cultivation.